Australia's property markets have experienced unprecedented demand over the last couple of years. Despite tourists not coming from overseas, visa holders not coming, students not being here, the borders being closed, and now despite the market's coolies, rising costs and supply shortages is causing one of the worst housing crises in history. I don't know about you, but I've been reading stories about entire families forced to live out of their cars, in camper vans and even in tents. And these are respectable people with reliable incomes and a good rental history to boot. So what's actually happening? Well, today I'm going to share with you a couple of segments that are going to help you better understand what's going on. Firstly, I'm going to replay for you one of my recent Property Insider chats that I had with Dr. Andrew Wilson. I hope you also subscribe to those, and every Tuesday on YouTube they come out. This is a short version of it where we share his latest rental reports and what we believe is ahead for our rental markets. And then I'm going to talk to you a bit about some statistics from the census, and one that created a lot of furore where they actually found that if Australia's got a housing crisis, why are there about 10% of properties vacant on census night? Well, as I said, I'm going to give you some idea in today's show to help you become a better informed investor. And of course, I'm going to share with you my popular mindset message. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Australia's in the middle of a rental crisis, and there's no relief in sight for tenants, with tight rental markets continuing to push up rents for both houses and units in our capital cities. The news is full of stories about spiralling rents forcing families into social housing, and the waiting times there are even worse than for private rentals, and I've even read stories of people in Tasmania needing to live in tents because they can't find proper accommodation. So I'm interested to discuss the latest My Housing Market Rental Report with Dr. Andrew Wilson in this week's Property Insider chat for Yahoo Finance. Hi, Andrew.
Yes, hello, Michael.
Well, Andrew, the rental crisis seems like there's no sign of easing, with vacancy rates dropping to the lowest point nationally since April 2006, and capital city rents have risen 15.6% in the last 12 months alone for houses. Andrew, it seems like there's a lot less properties on the market for rent at present, but there are a lot more people looking for rental accommodation at the moment.
Yes, we've been discussing this for quite some time, Michael, of course, the real crisis, and I don't use that word lightly, and it certainly is when people can't find accommodation, and I guess we call that the tenure. Renting is the tenure for those that aren't as wealthy or don't have the financial support that typically homeowners do have. So they are more of a marginalised group. And when there is a shortage of rental accommodation and there's no real, controls over how high rents can go, at the end of the day, tenants have to pay what the market is demanding. And the only relief we could possibly have to this situation is more properties for rent. And we have been underbuilding more or less for the last 6 years, despite that surge we had last year through Home Builder. So we just don't have enough rental properties available. And on the demand side, we're seeing more demand coming through with borders opening. Of course, that means international migration resuming, international students coming into the market. So the outside demand source is only going to put more pressure on properties that are available. And of course, the data is clearly showing that, Michael. In fact, we only have one capital city now that has house rents under $500 a week, and that's Melbourne. We have Sydney, Darwin and Canberra. Canberra's at $700 a week. Darwin and Sydney are over $600 a week and pushing towards $700 a week. In fact, Sydney's rent increased by 3.1%, Michael, over the month. And this, again, is a negative factor for the economy and inflation, because it does put pressure on tenants to be looking for extra income, which is another factor in not just with prices for general goods and services, but rents obviously take up a large proportion of a tenant's household budget. So now they'll be looking for relief, which means demands for higher wages, which is just what the Reserve Bank really doesn't want.
Well, investors are slowly coming back into the market to provide a little bit of extra stock, but not in large enough numbers to significantly increase the supply. And we're not building enough apartments, as you said. In fact, there's evidence that a number of what they call shovel-ready housing projects are being abandoned in response to soaring construction costs, jumping interest rates, uncertain end values, and the developers are having difficulty getting finance. So we can't build the apartments or the new homes in the quantities that are required, Andrew.
Yeah, and the point is, Michael, we actually need new housing. Even if we get higher numbers of investors, it's just rotating existing stock. They're buying from those that might be moving into another property, but again, it's just a rotation of existing stock. So it's not really increasing the overall number of dwellings that we have to house our population. And of course, we're seeing a lot of travel at the moment, Michael. So there's a lot of Airbnb temporary accommodation that's back in town. And that's just taking more stock out of the permanent market, Michael, which was added to during COVID to some degree when borders were closed. So there's no really good news there. Even the submarkets which had an excess of supply, and we're talking about inner suburban Sydney units and units in Melbourne's CBD, their vacancy rates have more than halved over the last year, and they're quickly being absorbed now, Michael. And of course, they will be a target for open borders, international migrants and students, but also they're becoming a target for those that are being marginalised because they can't afford to rent a house. You know, they're now looking at units. Families are looking at units because that's all they can afford.
Well, further compounding that is the fact that many investors sold up over the last few years. We've noticed it in the many properties that we've managed at Metropole, but speaking to other industry colleagues as well. And most of them have been bought by owner-occupiers. Now, I'm not sure why investors sold up. I guess they've been spooked because their properties did what they were meant to do. They went up in value. And I think there's also household sizes are shrinking, Andrew. A lot of tenants who previously shared accommodation, they're now working flexible hours, some working from home some of the time. And so they're starting to look for their own accommodation. They realise they can't work as easily with as many people around them.
Well, yes, Michael, as I said, it's becoming a perfect storm in the rental market, certainly a perfect storm for investors. Really, with such a strong demand for rental properties, investors really have an obligation to maximise their returns, and they can certainly do that just about everywhere at the moment.
Well, following on with my chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson a moment ago, I'd like to give you some thoughts as to one of the big structural changes that has occurred over the last couple of years that's led to the housing crisis we're getting, not just in rentals, but also just the general shortage of good properties. And that's something that came out of the recently released census data, which has confirmed what we've sort of known anyway, that the size of the Australian households has declined, well, in particular over the last 5 years since the last census. And the shift was accelerated during the COVID pandemic. And that's increased the demand for housing and, amongst other things, it's sent rents skyrocketing, even in the absence of the overseas migration. What the latest census data showed was that there's been more single-people households, and that's significantly outpaced the creation of one-bedroom dwellings. And obviously this disconnect is now showing that we're just not building enough apartments, and more recently apartment construction has undersupplied us, as I was just discussing with Andrew. You see, in rounded numbers, the average number of people comprising each household in the census has fallen from 2.6 to 2.5 people. Now, although that sort of seems marginal, that could actually equate to the requirement of an extra 2,000 homes. And in part, that explains the rental crisis we've got on our hands right now. You see, variation in household size leading to the formation of more households seems to be the mystery variable that goes some way to explaining the puzzling fact that rents are soaring again, sure, after initially plummeting in those early days of the pandemic, and they're going up despite the students and despite the tourists leaving the country and despite migration coming to a halt. I guess we can safely say that during COVID, people were looking to live with less people around them. And the shrinking of the average household and the formation of more households explains in part also why the number of unoccupied households has fallen proportionately through the last census, you probably read that there was this big hoo-ha that 1 in 10 houses were vacant on census night. And that's also made some people suggest we should have a vacant housing tax. But that figure didn't actually surprise me. Okay, just going back to what that meant. There were nearly 11 million private dwellings counted in the 2021 census, and the data shows that just over 1 million of those, about 10%, had nobody living them in census night. And as I said, the media loved the headline, but it really didn't surprise me. Well, firstly, remember, the census was conducted in late August last year when many of us were in lockdown, meaning a lot of Aussies couldn't go on vacation, so there were a lot of holiday homes and Airbnb properties left vacant. Now, it seems that at the time, there were also many unoccupied investment properties. But surprisingly, the share of homes that were unoccupied on census night actually fell. In previous years, there were even more, so it fell to a 15-year low. While 10.1% of homes were unoccupied in census night last year, that's actually a sharp fall from 11.2% that were empty in the previous census in 2016. And as I said, it's the lowest share of unoccupied property since 2006. You see, just because a property is vacant on census night doesn't mean it's genuinely empty. People may be in hospital, away on a business trip, staying at a partner's house. Of course, there's those truly unoccupied properties, those that are for sale, newly completed homes, or those waiting for demolition. Another interesting factor was that on census night, 58,155 people were living in caravans and almost 30,000 were living in houseboats. Anyway, just getting back to those unoccupied properties for a moment, empty properties were more common in regional Australia than in capital cities. The Northern Territory had the greatest proportion of unoccupied properties, 12.8%. But interestingly, that was down from 14% in the 2016 census. Tasmania had about 11.8% of its properties unoccupied, Victoria 11.1%, and other locations had smaller proportions. Some other interesting stats that came out the last census were that the proportion of people who owned their homes outright dropped to 31% in 2021 from 41.6% in 1996. In other words, fewer people didn't have a mortgage. Over the last 25 years, the number of homes owned outright has increased by 10%, but the number of properties owned with a mortgage have doubled. Now, again, that doesn't concern me or worry to me much because that doesn't mean there's going to be mortgage stress. What it often suggests is that people are using their equity in their home to buy investment properties. And yes, there's lots of new people in the market who do have to take a mortgage. You can't buy a property without taking on some debt. But at a national level, in the last census, fewer borrowers reported being in mortgage stress, defined as 30% of the income being spent on mortgage repayments. Now, of course, since that, it's only been a year ago, interest rates have gone up, but so has the value of the property. So when people are currently reporting how much debt Australians are taking on, they look at one side of the ledger. And yes, Australian households are more in debt than they ever have been. But you've got to look at the other side of the ledger where Australian households have more assets than they've ever had in their homes, in their super funds, in their share portfolios, in their bank accounts, in their offset accounts. So, in my view, the property markets are obviously going through the next stage of the cycle where prices are adjusting and prices in some locations are going to keep falling. Other locations are going to hold their values well, and in some areas properties are still going to go up in value. But as I've explained in previous podcasts, so I'm not going to bore you by repeating it again, I don't see a property crash. Sure, in some locations, property values could drop 10% over the next year. But in other locations, people don't have to sell. They're not in distress. They've still got jobs. They can still pay their mortgages. So therefore, those properties just aren't going to move. They're not going to sell. They don't have to move. Now, interestingly, the high end of the market always drops first. It leads the booms. It leads the downturns. And yes, there's going to be some people in outer suburbs who are going to have some financial challenges as well. Some young first home buyers who've, I guess, overcommitted themselves. But I guess what my discussion at the moment with Andrew Wilson a moment ago and now with you is that even though there's a bleak time for tenants, there's a shortage of properties for tenants, this is a time when rent returns are going to rise. So those investors who are going to find themselves paying a bit extra for their mortgages, they're going to find they're going to be getting more income as well. But it makes an interesting point that I've discussed with you in the past. Your future income is going to be very dependent on your tenant's ability to pay increasing rent over time. And that's why it's important to own properties in the right suburbs, those where tenants are going to be able to afford higher rents over time, rather than suburbs where tenants are only a week or two away from going broke. And that's why we never recommend investing in the newer outer suburbs, the new first home buyer areas, and in many regional locations. Now, again, it's not a judge of people, but you want tenants who are going to be able to pay you more rent. And in general, these are going to be locations where tenants are aspirational, where they've got higher income, where they're renting not because they can't afford to buy, but because of lifestyle locations, and they've got good incomes and are likely to have increasing incomes over time to help you pay more rent. So yes, we're in interesting times in the property market at the moment. We're in times where there's just so many negative messages in the media. You may be thinking, oh, I don't need to do anything. I'll just put off a decision. But if you're wondering how, or even if you should invest in this interesting phase of the property cycle, why not have a chat with my team at Metropole? By the way, we don't sell property, so the guidance we give you is independent. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced investor, at times like this, you need the advice of somebody who's got a holistic approach. And that's exactly what you're going to get from my team at Metropole. And we're going to share with you the frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for over 20 years. We help our clients grow, protect and pass their wealth through a range of services. But it all starts with putting a plan together for you. Allow us to build you a strategic property plan. Allow us to bring your future into the present so you can do something about it now. Now, doing something about it now may not mean buying a property. I don't know what your circumstances are, but why not plan? Plan to become the person you plan to become. And then I guess you've got a plan for your plan not to go to plan, because life's going to change along the way. But we're going to be there to help you. And you may choose to use our bias agency, our wealth advisory, property management, business advisory, renovations or development. Go to metropole.com.au. Find out about our range of services, and I look forward to being part of your ongoing wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
I'd like to have a chat with you about 9 important money tips to teach your children. Hey, but don't worry if you don't have children yet, or you're not planning to have any, because maybe these money tips will be useful for you, because you were somebody's child once, weren't you? Now, when I think about it, there are so many events, decisions and occurrences that I look back on over the years and think, wow, if only I knew then what I know now, how different things would have been. Well, it's too late for me, but one of the most important things we can do as parents, and now me as grandparents, is to equip our children to manage their lives more effectively. And one of the things they should learn about is money management, because most people don't teach that at home. Seemingly, though, many of us are reluctant to share our mistakes with our children because we're worried that they may think badly of us. In fact, most Australians don't teach their children anything about money, meaning we raise our children to be financially illiterate. So is it any wonder that most Australians live, well, they used to call it paycheck to paycheck, but you don't get a check anymore. But I guess pay period to pay period. And isn't it any wonder that most Australians never accumulate many assets? In fact, they accumulate more debts than assets. What's worse is what our children are being taught by not just the parents, but the school system, politicians and the media. They're teaching our children that the wealthy are greedy, they've got too much money, and this wealth needs to be redistributed. Well, I think that's wrong. But what kind of a message do you think that sends to our future generations? So I thought today, as a father of my own, now adult children, and a mentor to many budding property investors, I'd like to take a moment to share 9 important steps that you can give your children to make them more financially in control and independent. And the first lesson I'd like you to teach them is that today's debt equals tomorrow's slavery. When we are young, we tend to think in very narrow time increments. We seek immediate gratification and often don't like delaying things. And in particular, don't like delaying the purchase of things that we really, really want. Now, unfortunately, this leads a lot of people into a credit trap where they borrow money using their credit card, thinking it's their money, it's not, it's the bank's money. So they end up paying high interest rates, or they get personal loans and only end up paying back thousands of dollars in interest, or forever owing people money. But the fact is that today's debt is robbing them of tomorrow's earnings because they're sacrificing the money they don't even have yet. Limiting your debt obligations when you're young means you're going to have more control of your personal finances later in life and avoid financial hassles, those financial chains that bind you and stop you getting the freedom of the life you want. So the first lesson you should be teaching your children is that today's debt equals tomorrow's slavery. Another important lesson to teach them is that he who dies with the most toys isn't the victor. Now, look, we all like our toys. Well, I know, at least I do. But the expectation of having a lot of toys is a dreadful enemy of money management. We end up seeing how the other half live, with Instagram and social media and Facebook, or in the magazines or on TV shows. Reality TV isn't real, but it actually makes us want to live like them. It makes us want to live like them. It makes us think that that's what life's all about. No, that's not true. Consumerism is the new black that won't go away. The truth is, possessions don't make for a rich life. It's the experiences you have, the people you spend your time with, the things that money can't buy. That's what truly makes you wealthy. You've probably heard me say it before, true wealth is what you're left with if you lose all your money and all your possessions. So the second lesson to teach your kids, or maybe you, is that it's wrong to think that he who dies with the most toys wins. Not true. The third lesson is take responsibility, and that'll make you the master of your own destiny. Fact is, there's no such thing as rich victims. However, unfortunately, people are too quick to blame others for their own perceived failings in life these days. We've all become a society of litigious finger pointers, and as a result, many people feel they're being unjustly dealt a bad hand. The truth is, if you're courageous enough to cast a critical eye over your life, recognize that you are where you are now as a direct result of your own choices, and then you take ownership for your decisions, that'll help you build confidence, self-esteem, and self-respect. You've got to recognize you are where you are right now because of all the decisions you've chosen to make and the decisions you've chosen not to make. So the decisions you make today are going to decide where you are in the future. It's a cause and effect relationship. It's not the world that's going to change. You're going to have to. So you've got to have the inner strength in knowing that you're the master of your own destiny rather than handing over power and control to somebody else. Let's face it, they're not going to have your best interests in heart the way you do. Third lesson to teach your kids then is take responsibility, and that will make you the master of your own destiny. You've got to be the pilot of your life to get you where you want to get to, not a passenger just along for the journey. The fourth lesson is that of patience and waiting. Teach them that when they fly the family coupe, no doubt they're going to want everything. They're going to want a car. They're going to want a good job. They're going to want the latest electronic gizmos. But in all likelihood, they'll have to work their way up the food chain, learning to prioritize how you make best use of the fortnightly or weekly money that comes in. So they've got to understand the difference between wants and needs and recognize that all the money that they spend on those material things that they just had to have today is less money that they're going to have to fund their future years and their retirement. But they also need to know that if they work hard and invest even harder, their purchasing power will increase over time. So one of the important lessons to teach our children, and ourselves if we haven't learned that, is the concept of delayed gratification. The fifth lesson to teach your kids is luck is made through hard work. Many of us like to attribute the success of others to good fortune, to luck. Now, maybe they were in the right place at the right time, or they knew the right person. So while a handful of people have lucked out by winning the lottery, truly successful people have done the hard yards to reach the pinnacle of their chosen field or their endeavour, or being successful investors as well. So if you can find something that you're passionate about and make a living doing it, you're going to be far more likely to achieve great things because you're going to work harder to reach your goals. every day won't be a struggle. So luck is when you are in the right place at the right time and recognize it because you've prepared yourself to do that. The sixth lesson to teach your children is you don't need millions and millions of dollars to achieve financial freedom. I know there's lots of property investors up to their eyeballs in debt. Many of society's rich and powerful players are asset rich, but cash flow poor. So some people I've seen as clients of Metropole have actually built substantial property portfolios on what others would suggest is low incomes. And boy, have I seen a lot of professionals with very, very high incomes spend more than they earn even at those high income rates and not have anything to show for it. So financial freedom isn't really dependent upon how much you earn, but on your relationship with money and your level of personal responsibility and money management. And I guess, as I said a moment ago, delayed gratification, making sure that you spend less than you earn, invest it, keep investing it, letting compounding and time and leverage work its magic, and then you're going to have an asset base to live off. So that brings me to the next lesson to teach your kids, which would be spend less than you earn and invest the rest. Now, I've already just said it, but if you follow that golden rule, enjoy it. Boy, it sounds simple, but don't downplay the simplicity of it. You're going to be able to get towards that path of financial freedom. So how much should you invest? Well, it really depends what your personal exertion income is and how much spare money you've got, but at least 10% and even more should be put aside even before you spend anything else, just like the tax man takes their money out at the beginning of the month because they know that they're not going to be able to get it out of you at the end of the year. So spend less than you earn, save it, invest it, and over time you'll build wealth. I guess the last lesson I'd suggest you teach your children, like I'd like to teach mine, is your youth won't last forever, so use it wisely. Now, interestingly, in the early years, if you do start investing, compounding will actually, over time, make even those small investments that you make early in your life when you go to start working, it'll make them quite a large asset. So we tend to see a lot of people at Metropole when they're 50, 55, 60, and they suddenly realize, hey, I'm going to retire soon. I haven't got anything. On the other hand, those who start early and have a long runway, even if they make some mistakes along the way, they are the ones that accumulate significant wealth. So the lesson to teach your children is start saving and investing early in life, and you're likely to secure your financial future. So the message I'd like to give you at the end of this little chat is that wealthy people do certain things every day, every single day, that sets them apart from everyone else. They've got good daily success habits that they've learned from their parents. And these habits are the reason for the wealth gap in our country and the real reason why the rich keep getting richer. Now, we're likely to be the only mentors and most likely to be the most influential mentors our children have. Think about it. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Now, you may say, no, it's not. I'm not like my parents. Well, have a look at your partner, your life partner, your spouse, your husband, your wife, and you'll see that, hey, yes, the apple does not fall far from the tree. You become more like them as you get older. So unless we teach our children good daily success habits and that way level the playing field, the rich will continue to get richer and the poor will continue to get poorer. So it might just literally pay to give them a bit of your time, a bit of your wisdom, and teach them these money lessons. Well, I hope you got some benefit from my chat about the rental crisis with Andrew Wilson and just some of my thoughts about some of the latest census data. And if you did, and you know somebody who would also get benefit, why not tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast? There's a share button on every podcast app, and I love it when I see how many new subscribers we get each month. By the way, if you are a new subscriber, why not listen to, well, there's close to 400 episodes. Each have got their own tale. Each have got their own lessons. So go back and listen. You can listen to me at 1.5 times speed. I still sound pretty good. And my way of saying thank you for subscribing to this podcast, go to podcastbonus.com.au, podcastbonus.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes, and you can get a bundle of reports, my way of saying thank you for subscribing to this podcast. You can catch me in between these twice weekly shows by looking out for me on social media. Look for Michael Yardney or join my private Facebook group. Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?